So this is just a little fun exercise that you might want to do, and it's kind of playing a bit more with tone, and this time looking at white on black. So some things that you can use in order to work in this way. These are what we call Conte crayons, and this is my very old, very worn set of them. They are quite nice sticks when you first buy them. This is kind of what's left of my whites, and I have various thicknesses of those in here. You also may wish to use something like just a white pastel stick, one option, and another option would be something like a white pastel pencil. None of these are on the mandatory course material supply list, but there might be things that you have lying around, or you may wish to invest in them in the future. And then in terms of paper, this is the Daler Rowney pastel paper. So obviously the pastel paper is going to have tooth or grain. And this one is the Cools. Come in various shades, various colours. There's lots of blues, there's a brown, a darker blue, there's a khaki colour. So there's some quite nice ones in here. I think I'm going to go for a dark blue so that we can actually see the contrast. And then I'm going to just tape the paper down as usual. I'm going to reuse some of my tape that I used last time. This just stops the paper from slipping around as I'm working. If your masking tape is clean, you can always reuse it. You don't have to throw it away every time. Just be aware of transferring anything that's slightly dirty onto your work. So this time I have a reference photograph where I've actually changed the colour. So this is actually monochromatic, and the background is black. So here I have navy, and I'm going to use white. Now, the first thing that you'll see in this picture is that the glass of milk, you can actually see the top ellipse, and I was referring to ellipses in the last video. So the ellipse shape is like so, rather than a full circle shape. And then the bottle is seen straight on. So that particular shape, we don't have to worry about the ellipse again, very much like in the last video where we were looking at it from below. So again, I'm going to plan my composition. Now you can either use a pastel pencil like this, or you could use your Conte crayon. You could even use something like a white chalk. This is just cheap white chalk, which is bought in sets. You could have a play with that, perhaps on some sugar paper. I wouldn't use it on good quality paper because it's not necessarily an art material, so it's not going to be particularly good grade. So again, I'm going to now look at my composition. So the top of my bottle, I think, is going to probably sit around here. And then I'm going to want to think about where the neck's going to come down to. And what I might actually do, because I do have this option, would be to go back to my pastel pencil set and just use a grey. Because not all of the tones on here are white or black. We've also got tones in between. So here, down this side of the bottle, is actually a slightly darker tone, and here again is even darker still. Now you can use the method that I showed in the previous video, where you're using a ruler, or you're using something like a pencil in order to get a straight line or look at angles. That's absolutely fine. Or you might just want to go freehand. That's fine too, whatever your preference is. Now you have to remember as well, we're not going to be drawing everything in, because we're going to be letting the surface, or the substrate as we call it in creative terms, we're going to let the substrate show through. So that means we're not going to be covering it, and we're going to be wanting the the natural colour to show through. So I'm using quite linear marks in order to block things out. But again, what we're looking at is we're looking at blocks of tone. So if you start to look at the master image and you're almost thinking of it as abstract pieces of an image, so you're looking at shapes. So here I'm looking at a white shape very much like this, and again here like this, and these, when we see them in the picture, we just see them as kind of part of the overall composition. But when we're breaking down that visual information again, what we're doing is we're actually seeing them as blocks of colour, blocks of tone. This is actually a slightly darker. And I might even want to involve the willow charcoal here too, and just very gently mix it on top, and that's going to give me a darker grey. And this is all here is quite dark grey, so I'm going to put a sort of lightish grey in first, and I'm going to mix that dark willow charcoal on top. And one of the ways that we can actually mix the colour on the page is to just gently blend that with our finger. When you're blending, always make sure you use a different finger for a different colour or shade. So this has already got grey on it. So unless I want my white to turn grey, I need to use a different finger in order to actually blend that down. So I'm just blocking in at the moment. Now here we've got quite a pronounced white area, and it almost overlaps. So again, we're looking at angle and we're looking at shape. I'm just blocking that white right in there, and in the middle of that you can see there's a reflection, so I might want to add that slightly darker area in here, and down here is grey. So again, I might want to just hatch that grey in, and then use the willow charcoal on top so I can get that nice dark grey tone in there. And I can see here we've also got some white. And you can always go back over your white if it doesn't seem bright enough. You can always just hatch across and go over the top. Down here I can see there's another shape that looks like this, and it's almost a pale grey, so I'm going to just, it'll be squeaky again like the charcoal. Get used to a bit of squeaking when we're working in this medium. So if you go from light to dark, you can always darken something up, but it's slightly harder to lighten something you've already made dark, if that makes sense, in most scenarios. So just kind of err on the side of caution when you're laying your colours or your tones down. So here I need to put the other side, the other shoulder of the bottle in. And again, this is kind of a pale grey tone. It actually goes off the edge of the paper on the reference photo, so just, you can either crop it down afterwards, or you might want to take it off of the paper. It's entirely up to you. One of the things I like to get people thinking about early on is how they want to compose things. So when we start, we might be copying things quite a lot, but as we progress, we want to start using judgment and discernment so that we become confident in how we compose things. And in that way, it just makes you more independent as a creator, because you're thinking about how you want something to look, or how it might look. Or you might want to change a composition. You might not want it to to look exactly as it does. Now, because of the angle of this, it's quite interesting here, because what we find is we almost have a straight line going across here, which is a slightly darker tone than that, so I'll add some willow charcoal. And then it almost looks as though the milk is kind of going uphill, but it's just an optical illusion. It's just the angle and the way that the photograph has actually distorted the image. When you're actually doing your own composition, you might want to sort of imagine how it might be. You might not want to take something off the edge of composition. You might just think, I'll use my own judgment. So most of this from here on is pretty white. So I'm going to use this on its side now to block in that white area, because the wider something is, obviously the more of the ground it's going to cover, and obviously the narrower the point of your implement is, the less it's going to cover your composition. So I'm going to take this down to here. For the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to imagine that the string at the bottom is actually not here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of fade this off the page, and that's using my discernment to actually create the image. Now we have a glass over here. Sorry, I should say over here, I'm looking at my reference photo. So what I might do with the glass is to just, there's like a greyish area here, and again I might darken that grey up slightly. So that's our vertical, and then we've kind of got, it's hard to see this on here. I'm actually going to use a charcoal pencil because I'm finding it tricky to actually see. Now this is when we come up against our ellipses I was referring to in the last video, and this is where those curved lines can cause us a few headaches and dramas if we're not careful. So what we're seeing here is just a very gentle curve. That front curve is actually quite gentle, and there's also kind of a thick line and a thinner line here too. And then at the back, kind of curving around like this. So we need to get the ellipse looking accurate, otherwise our picture is going to look a bit off if we don't get that correct. So over here I'm just going to use this darker colour, and I'm going to use some grey. And then underneath here we can kind of see through the glass. We've got the side of the bottle, and then we have this darker area here, and then we've also got some dark around the rim of the glass. Now I can get quite a fine line just using that edge of the charcoal, and this is where you need to really carefully observe what you can see, both in terms of the tone and the shape and the angles. So over here we've got some dark as well. So we want to make it look as though we're looking through an object. And don't forget, we need to also blend that there. You have to be careful here because it's a very small area and we've got some defined lines, so just be careful. If you've put defined lines in the foreground and you have blended areas to kind of go underneath, you just need to work carefully around those. What I want to do there is just give an illusion of that white. The other thing we've also got here is we've got an area here which is slightly darker too. So I'm just going to fill that in, and then I'm going to just gently blend across and blend down. There we go. And then we've also got areas up here that we need to come back to. So before I continue on with that glass, I'm just going to block those in. So I can see a very dark area here, and it looks kind of like an upside down Y. So start to look at the things that you're seeing and then kind of re-describe them or redefine them. So instead of just saying I can see a dark area here, well, what shape is it? What angle does it have? And then that will help you to translate that onto the paper. So start to kind of really analyze what it is that you're seeing. Here, just need to... So all we're doing is we're just working with 3 different tones here. We're working with black, we're working with quite pale grey. Actually it's 4 if you think about it, because I'm combining these to make a darker grey. And then we've also got the white as well. So there's really not a lot in terms of what's actually being used, and also in terms of materials that you need in order to do this. Don't forget to use different fingers for different shades and tones you may have. And don't worry if you smudge outside the line like I just did as well, we can always fix that later. Do pay attention to how much of this you've got on your fingers there. And if necessary, bring out the trusty baby wipe. So this is quite a good time now for me to just give my hands a wipe off, just to make sure that I'm not going to transfer too much back onto my work. In terms of dust in my workspace, it's not too bad. If you keep this to hand, you can always use it either on your fingers or to tidy up your workspace. So up here, I need to add a little bit more detail to the top of this bottle. I need to kind of describe that shape so that it's looking like a correctly angled ellipse. It almost has like 3 areas, and these might almost look like broken lines in some places. So don't worry about, you know, making really bold lines or thinking, you know, it looks like it's solid when we see it in real life, but when it's seen like this, we can almost imply what we're seeing. So we can actually alter the composition. I'm just going to have a little go with this. It was just blurring outside the line. And don't forget as well, we can always shape it with an eraser. So we can always sharpen up a line or re-describe a shape just by using an eraser carefully. I actually quite like that dark line on top there. It's sort of adding a bit of weight to the bottle. I'm just going to give that a little tickle with my finger, and then I'm just going to wipe that on the baby wipe and just pull that dust off of the paper. There we go. Now then, how are we doing? We need to add a little bit more of that, just that grey shadow area on the surface here. And then we've also got some kind of subtle grey shadows here where it's one of the sides of the bottle, so there's an edge. And all we're doing is we're just kind of making that look a little bit more true to life. We've also got some shadow here. And we've got kind of a large area of shadow here. So I'm just going to scrub that in, and then I'm going to drag it down with my finger. I'm going to keep dragging that bottle down here. Because don't forget, we can use the powder. Just because we haven't applied it with a stick of something doesn't mean it's not viable. So we can continue to use that powder. And as I was saying, you know, I'm changing the composition here, so I'm using my judgment. So I know there's going to be an angle here at the bottom, so I'm just putting that angle in and then just dragging the pigment into the paper like so. And I would say there's probably a tiny bit here that we just need to put in there. Clean my edge up here. There we go. And then we need to kind of make sure that overall the blending looks in keeping. So here I've got some quite unblended areas, so I'm just giving them a little blend with my finger to make sure that it's looking more uniform. That's really tempting here. I've got dust that I just would love to blow off, but I can't do that because if I blow it off the page, it's a potential hazard. So I have to resist that temptation and distract myself by coming back to the glass here. So in terms of this glass, all of this area here is one of the darker tones. So I'm going to block that in using the willow charcoal. Now there's another ellipse, and the ellipse that we can see is actually created by the milk inside the glass. So I'm just going to sketch that in, and all I've done is I've come down from this edge here and just drawn a subtle curve, and then I'm going to just blend that in here, and I'm going to wipe that finger because it's got lots of very dark pigment on it. And then we've got some almost sort of smudgy detail here, so I'm just going to kind of what we call scumble. When we scumble with either a brush or with a drawing implement, what we're doing is we're kind of, it's like a dotted line effect. So we're just kind of tickling the paper, but we're not actually making a solid connection. What we're doing is we're kind of taking it on and off of the page. And here we've got a much whiter area, so I'm just going to put that in with my white. Almost like a sort of curved effect there. And then we see the milk in the glass, we can see the other side of the ellipse, and this is the whitest part. And then it kind of goes down here, and then the shape of the glass changes, so we're going to bring that in, and then it continues like so. And then it's in front of this, so the bottom of it needs to be in front of the bottom of the bottle. And then we just draw that ellipse here. So another curved line at the bottom. And then we're thinking about how we did the last exercise. We need to mirror. So here we're going to mirror that line just coming into the bottom of that ellipse. My pencil is a little bit blunt, which is kind of affecting things slightly. One thing about pastel pencils is they're quite tricky to actually sharpen. What I will do is I'll just switch to using a Conte crayon because I've got a larger area to cover. So this is going to be very white here. I'm just going to go up to the side of that bottle. And then I'm going to go over the edge of that shadow we created, because if you look at the picture, and this part of the picture, we can actually see the milk and the glass. Because it's opaque, we can't see through it. So where we've put the background in behind it, we just need to make sure that we cover that, like so. And then this part here, be careful of the black charcoal you've already laid down. And again, that's quite solid white. And then here, it's very, very slightly grey. So I'm going to put a little bit of my pale grey in there. And actually I'm going to use a charcoal pencil. I'm just going to put that in there like so. And I'm also going to, where we scumbled some of that light reflecting, I'm going to just fill in the blue parts where I can see the substrate underneath. And I'm just going to cover that with my black charcoal pencil, and again here too. There we go. And there's a slight bit of light reflecting here. I'm just going to add that in. Some of those scumbled kind of dotted lines. There's another one over here too. A little bit of light reflecting and just coming down there. So I'm just checking the reference photograph. I can see the edge of the white bottle there. So we can see that through the top of the glass. then we can see the background, then we can see the light reflections, which I'm just going to give a little smudge to. And we have this quite white area over here. Just drag that outside the line, so I'm just tidying that up a bit. And then we've also got this bit here. You can use a blending stump to do this, which is one of the optional items for this course, but I wouldn't worry about that. Fingers are perfectly good for that kind of thing. Now under here, again, we've got some shadow, and that's to do with the shape of the glass. And then under here, it's very white, so we're going to block that white in using the side of the Conte crayon. Just need to be able to see what I'm doing, so I'm a bit ambidextrous, so I'm going to use my left hand for this. Don't worry if you're not, just carry on using your right. And then I'm going to blend, and because it's curved, I'm going to follow the curve with my finger when I blend. So I'm just going to go down like this. Just going to soften that shadow area there too. I'm going to add some more highlight over here. And give my fingers a wipe. And there's my trusty brush that I was using in the last video. So I'm just going to move some of that powder around there. You can also use the brush that you're using to kind of get the pigment off the paper. You can also use it to just blend the colour on the paper if you like. It will drag some of the pigment off, but you can always, what I call, kind of tickle the pigment into the paper. You'll always, with a powdery medium, you're always going to get powder either before, during or after your composition. It's not the cleanest thing to work with, and it can take some getting used to as well. So if it's your first time using this and you're not too sure, do stick with it, because you know, we use it in different applications and we use it for different exercises. So just because you find something quite difficult or you don't really take to it the first time, do bear in mind that, you know, it's just one way of using it and that there are many ways of using it. So when you come to this part here, there's quite a few interesting light play reflections. And all you want to do is just kind of look at what you're seeing in the photograph and then just try and recreate it. So just use different types of line. So just think about line and angle. So I'm trying to kind of describe some of this light play. So I'm just going in and kind of refining now where some of these areas are. I'm just checking against the picture to make sure that I've covered off the main parts that I can see. And if you like a more solid finish, you can always go back over these areas of white. If you're still seeing some of the substrate through your pigment, then you can always increase the amount of pigment that sits on the surface of the paper. So that's pretty much it, just for the purposes of this exercise. Obviously when I pick this up, I will clean up the area around here and just get some of the dust off, and then I'll post a photograph of the finished piece as well for you to look at. But hopefully that wasn't too difficult. I know it can be a bit daunting when you first start. It's just basically looking at the principles of shape, colour, angle and tone, and it's quite a lot to take in, particularly if you're a beginner. So do bear with it. I mean, obviously I've been doing art for quite a long time, so don't compare your beginning to my kind of stage of the journey, and don't become disillusioned. You know, nobody's an expert by any means, but You know, we're all at different stages, and so, you know, if you don't like what you've created, then there's always next time where you can have another go. The other thing you might want to do is to set up a still life of your own. And if you're going to do that, it's probably best to have something with a single light source so that you can look at the shadows. But it's not an absolute must. I mean, as you've seen, I've got pictures here where you can't see a huge amount of shadow cast. So it's possible to do this and just copy something from a two-dimensional image, because we're not necessarily looking at the 3D so far. What we're doing is we're looking at tone, and we're looking at how to observe, which is slightly different. So do have a play and do persevere. I hope you didn't find it too difficult. If you have any questions, do post them in the comments thread for questions for this particular class. And have fun. Just have fun and play. And yeah, I hope you had fun, and I'll see you soon.